The Community Shield final has just ended, and we have just watched a demolition job from Arsenal onto Manchester City. It was complete domination in terms of the scoreline, in terms of the play, in terms of the dominance in all areas of the pitch, and it has ended comfortably with Arsenal winning 3-0 in a very deserved victory. So today I'm going to be telling you about the 5 things we've learned from this Community Shield final and what it tells us going into next season. The first thing we learned from this Community Shield final is that Martin Odegaard could be back to his best. I think in this game we were seeing him in a slightly deeper role than he normally is. Normally he's playing in an attacking midfield role as sort of the sole progressive fulcrum of the team. And now with the addition of Bruno Guimaraes, with more trust in Lewis Skelly, we're seeing him sort of being able to share the burden of progressing the ball forward. And I think we saw him in that sort of deeper role and not being the only creative fulcrum of the team. I think Bruno G was also spraying a lot of the long passes forward. Skelly was the one who got the initial assist and was also doing a very good job passing the ball and progressing it forward. So Odegaard wasn't the sole creative fulcrum, and I think that gave him a lot of freedom and an ability to do really well. Obviously, he got a very, very good goal. He was getting some very good not assists, but creating lots of good chances. On that second goal, it was his very, very good cross. Amazing vision to find that, which ended up going to Solis, which then led to him getting the assist for Havertz on the goal. And we were seeing him constantly making great connecting passes between the attack and defense. He looked very sharp, very lively. It was one of the best performances from Odegaard I think we've seen in a very long time. And if he's able to keep up that form going into the rest of the season, it could mean we're seeing a very scary form of Martin Odegaard in the Premier League. And I think that could be very, very interesting because it could allow us to see a new identity for Arsenal and a version of Arsenal we haven't seen for a long time. Because historically, I feel like in the past few seasons, Arsenal have looked a little bit lackluster in attack. A lot of the times, it seems like their title wins and a lot of their victories are coming off the foundations of a strong defense and a very stable midfield and using set pieces as a strategy to score, more so than it is from creativity in their attack. And if Odegaard is able to get back to his best and be playing those kinds of passes and have the ability to link up with Saka in the attack and whoever else they sign, probably a new left winger, that could definitely be a very big thing for Arsenal in their attack and also in their midfield. Having Bruno G is obviously going to be huge for that progression. And so if you have Rice who's already amazing, you have Bruno Guimaraes, and then you have Odegaard back to his best, that could be one of the strongest attacks, not just in the league, but in all of Europe. So I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on whether Odegaard's able to sustain this form because it could be making a huge difference in how dominant Arsenal can be in the league this season and how much of a chance they have in the Champions League this season as well. The second thing we learned from this game is that Manchester City look very rusty, and there are 3 key players I think looked very, very poor today. The first for me was Kusanov. I think he was poor on all 3 of the goals, and he was at fault for all of the 3 of those goals. And I think that's a little bit concerning because I don't think Manchester City have a very strong right back solution there if Kusanov doesn't end up playing well. Maybe they have to push a center back out to the right. Maybe you put Guehi at right back or something along those lines, or Diaz at right back. Maybe you have to put Nunez there at right back and have him convert, like inverting into the midfield or something. But I don't think that we saw a very strong performance from Kusanov today. And I think he needs to be able to rediscover his form for City to be successful. Otherwise, that right hand side could definitely be a big issue for them going forward. Another player I thought was very poor was Donnarumma. And that's definitely concerning because you just sold Trafford, who was a very good deputy. You've replaced him now with a player who's not going to be as anywhere near the level of a Trafford or a Donnarumma. So if Donnarumma isn't at his best, that's a huge level that you're going to be dropping. I think he looked very poor with his shot stopping, especially on, I believe, the second goal. He needs to be doing better with the save there. And that was an all around a performance from Donnarumma. And I'm a little bit concerned because we have seen throughout his career before, Donnarumma has sometimes been susceptible to not making good saves and sometimes hasn't looked like the best keeper in the world. So there are definitely question marks as to whether he'll be able to sustain the levels he has been at in 24-25 and even to an extent last season. That's definitely a little bit of a concern. The last player I thought looked very rusty, which I was very surprised about, and also a little concerned for City about, is Erling Haaland. He wasn't making the right runs. He wasn't getting touches. A lot of times there were good crosses going into the box that you would expect Haaland to be getting on the end of, but he just wasn't making the runs to find the crosses and get there. When he was getting the opportunity to shoot, it was oftentimes from bad angles or he was just finishing really poorly, and that's a very concerning thing. Especially because Haaland is like the attacking fulcrum of this team. Obviously, Semenyo, Doku, Cherky especially are good players, but Haaland is the superstar that elevates Manchester City from being, a good team, a contending team, to a team that can definitely be one of the favorites for the title or be even one of the favorites for the UCL. And Holland is normally very good at the start of the season and then sort of tapers off a little bit later. So maybe because it's a World Cup year, he hasn't gotten that rest that he needed. I'm not sure if that's the case or whether it's just he's a little rusty and he just needs some more time to get back into the flow of things. But if he isn't at his best at the start of the season, it could be a huge concern for Manchester City. The fact that he got hooked at like 52 minutes into the game from Marmoush is a sign that he was just not good enough in today's game. The third thing we learned from today's game was that Arsenal's right hand side is a problem a year ago. Because yes, they dominated, but down that right, they looked shocking. Ben White had a very poor game defensively, and offensively, I think he wasn't sharp enough. His crosses weren't the best at times. There was that one moment where the ball was just sort of rolling into the goal, and I know he's not a striker, but he really has to be doing better there, being more alert to try and pounce and like score that open goal that he had instead of just letting the ball get cleared away off the line by, I believe, Diaz. He looked very poor. I think Madueke was making bad decisions very regularly. A lot of attacks were going down that right hand side for Arsenal, and he was very, very wasteful in the way he was using the ball. And so that could definitely be an issue if Arteta isn't able to solve it. I think Arsenal need a new right back. That's the first way you need to solve it because Timber's going to be out for a little while. I'm not sure whether you want that to be a more attacking option because while Timber's out, Arsenal are probably going to need to be the protagonist in games. And so you want a right back who can go forward and create overlaps with Saka and create opportunities, or whether you'd want that to maybe be a more specialist defensive option, like maybe an Aaron Wan-Bissaka, for example, because that would make you a little bit weaker in the short term, but in the long term, Aaron Wan-Bissaka would be a really useful tool against teams like Madrid with Vinny in the Champions League, or Kvara with PSG, or even Diaz or Rafinha. Wan-Bissaka could be a very useful weapon for like 1v1 defending against those players. So I think it would definitely be interesting what direction Arsenal would go in if they do sign a right back, but I feel like they definitely need a right back, more so than they need a center back, because White can sort of convert into a right center back role, maybe be second or third choice after Saliba when he's back in Mosquera. But I think having White as your starting right back is definitely not a recipe for success this season. I also think that you need to have more trust in Dauman and Nwaneri, or Arteta needs to have more trust in Dauman and Nwaneri. Um, Saka's a good player in my opinion, but I don't think he can play all the Premier League games and all the Champions League games. I feel like he's a player who kind of needs that Dembele treatment, where he's rested in a lot of games in the Premier League, and then he's ready for like the big games or the Champions League games, and then he's able to be at his best. Because I think he's been overused so much in the past few years. His fitness and injury record, his ability to avoid injuries are at all-time lows. And I think to get the best out of Saka, you need to make sure that he's not being overplayed. And I don't think Madueke is a solution. I feel like Nwaneri even is better than Madueke is, and he should be the one getting trusted. I know you just signed Madueke last season, but for me, he should be the one going and not Nwaneri. But then also, I think Max Dauman could definitely be a solution at right wing, and I feel like he should be getting trusted more this season. And if he is, I think he could be a huge asset for Arsenal as their second choice and being a very good deputy to Bukayo Saka and being very creative and useful as a solution to that right hand side. Obviously, it's a big risk to have a 17-year-old playing a lot of games in the Premier League. It's not very common. But I think Max Dauman is the kind of unique talent that deserves to be playing all those games. And he could be a big difference maker for Arsenal if he's given the opportunity this season. The fourth thing we learned from this Community Shield final was that Manchester City have central progression issues. I know it's early, but I don't think Anderson had a good debut. I don't think he looks good enough to replace Rodri. Rodri is such a talented player in terms of the way he's able to progress the ball and just dictate possession for teams. I feel like Anderson just isn't that. And you pair him with a Kovacic, you pair him with a Nico Gonzalez, and I don't think the midfield there for City is strong enough to do what Maresca wants him to do. Maresca really seemed like he wanted City to be progressing through the middle the entire game. They were really avoiding the flanks. It was always trying to go through the middle, and they really struggled. Arsenal, to be fair, have a very good block, but Arsenal were completely neutralizing City the entire game. I struggle to think of very many times, if any, that City carved Arsenal open through the middle and actually created a chance. A lot of times they were having to resort to long balls because of that. And I just think that, um, for one, City need to find a solution, maybe in the market, for that midfield issue where they're having inability to progress the ball through the center. But I also just think that they need to prioritize going down the wings more. And I'm not sure if that's going to be a facet of Maresca's game or whether that's something that Maresca would be interested in doing. But you have Doku and Semenyo, who are two very good options if you want wingers who can like hug the touchline and deliver crosses into the box. And you have Erling Haaland, who is a huge aerial threat. He's a great box threat and finisher. He would definitely be great in a system like that. And I think City needs to be more flexible in the way that they're attacking, not just going down the center, because that looks like it could be a problem area for them, and being more willing to go down the wings and get crosses into the box. The last thing I feel like we learned from this game is that Arsenal are going to be a serious team in all competitions. Because even though this is just a preseason game and preseason isn't the biggest determinant of how good a team is going to be in the actual season. It's a trophy, it's a final, and it's a statement win. It's not just like a 2-1 or a 1-0. This was a complete demolition of Manchester City, not just in the scoreline, but in the performance and the way that they played. And Manchester City aren't some like scrubs, right? Like, yes, they lost Pep and got Maresca. Yes, they lost Rodri, but they are still probably like a minimum top 8 team in the UCL. They're still probably a favorite for the Premier League title, and Arsenal completely destroyed them without starting half their team. Saliba still needs to come back to this. Timber still needs to come back to this. Rice still needs to come back to this. Saka still needs to come back to this. They're probably going to be signing a new left winger as well. And they completely neutralized arguably one of the strongest attacks in the league and carved open one of the strongest defenses, not just in the league, but in the world for the attack and the defense that City have. A lot of times I feel like you look at teams like Barca and Bayern and PSG in Europe, and because they don't play in the Premier League and we don't see them as struggling as much, maybe they have easier leagues, we see them as like a level above teams like Arsenal. At least I do. But I think this result is a reminder that we need to start looking at Arsenal as being up there too, because they have definitely have the best defense in the entire competition. And to be honest, their midfield, based on what we saw today, if it maintains these levels, is probably one of the best in the competition too. Like Odegaard at his best, if he can maintain this form, Bruno Guimaraes and Declan Rice, I don't think his levels off a Vitinha, Fabian, João Neves midfield, or a Rodri, Pedri, Fermin midfield, and especially not a Saibari, a Musiala, Kimmich, Pavlovic midfield. I think Arsenal's midfield at its best can definitely be at the same level as those teams. And Arsenal need to start playing like it, and we need to start treating Arsenal as a team that is on the level of those teams. Yes, they made a UCL semifinal and a final, but they aren't treating those games like they're equals to their opponents. In last season's Champions League final, they had 26% possession against PSG. But based on what we saw in this game today, I don't think Arsenal are going to be treating these other teams like they're a tier below them now, and they shouldn't be. They should be going into these games against teams like PSG or Bayern or Barca as equals to them, trying to maintain similar levels of possession, trying to take the game to them. And they definitely should have the talents based on what we saw today to be able to do so. So those are the 5 things I think we learned from today's Community Shield final. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.